So thank you for coming to talk to us. This is Dr. Sam Chadwick, who works at Chester University, and he's done a PhD on what we're going to talk about. The talk has been about 15 months in the making. I asked him 15 months ago whether he thought he'd be able to do something sort of vaguely Christmassy for us, and we're very lucky that he said yes. So I am now going to move the screen focus onto his slides and take it away, Sam.
I'm Sam Chadwick. I'm a visiting lecturer at the University of Chester. I am talking today about Puritanical Protestants and Petulant Peasants, the festival and feast day year in the 15 to 1700s. I specialise in the English Civil War, artillery, sieges, anything that goes bang, and also the crowd, the idea that the lower classes, the people, are an important idea, and that they are sometimes riotous and rebellious, but they're also sometimes they actually get out and support their structures. And this is kind of like where they kind of fit into the feast and festival days. We think of these as just a nice little thing that breaks up the day, but they're actually very key to both the suppression and the explosion of these lower classes. I'm coming to you from lockdown, where we've got a period of draconian measures to save the body of the country. Let me take you to another time where the draconian measures to save the spirit and the soul of the country. I'm going to take you back to a time of political intrigue, plague, and philosophical arguments. So hopefully it shouldn't be too far to imagine what these people's lives are like. Famously, or perhaps infamously, Oliver Cromwell, after taking control of the country, after executing Charles I and Charles II being sent out to France, banned Christmas. It wasn't so much of an actual real ban. This is a little bit of hyperbole that history brings up. But this is the statement from the House of Commons discussing about Christmas and whether it should be banned and what should be done with it. Christmas was a contentious thing, and we hopefully will see why that is. And just for those of you who don't read 17th century hand, here is the statement itself. The council conceives to be upon the old grounds of superstition and malignancy, tending to the avowing of the same and contempt of the present laws and government, and therefore request Parliament to consider further provisions and penalties for abolishing and punishing these old superstitious observations, and meetings with such malicious contradiction of offenders in that behalf. Also, that they have received information of frequent resort and exercise of the idolatrous mass to the great dishonour of Almighty God, notorious breach of the laws, scandal of the government, wherein they have already taken some course, desire Parliament to take that matter also into consideration for further remedies and suppression of this idolatry. So, this is quite a polarized terms. You don't think nowadays of people getting that angry about the idea of Christmas. Well, people thinking about the idea of Christmas being banned, but not the idea that Christmas is there and dishonoring God. I'm going to have a look at why these crackdowns are going on and what the reasoning is behind this. I'm hopefully going to be working out whether we're moving into a more civilized time, and also explaining why Parliament, why the Puritans, and why Cromwell are doing this. So to begin with, I'm afraid I've got to give you a crash course in history so you know where we're coming from and what we're going to. All of these are super generalizations and should be taken with a pinch of salt. Historians have come to metaphorical, and in one case I know, actual literal blows about some of the definitions of these. So really do take them all with a pinch of salt, but hopefully they'll give you some grounding. So the late medieval is generally classed as 1300 to 1500, while the early modern period is 1500 to 1700. Cromwell and the English Civil War is coming at the end of the early modern period at 1642, 1646. We're moving from a time of the end of feudalism. So the idea that you have a king at the top, nobles beneath him, knights beneath them, and peasants beneath them, and that everything is done on vassalage, on the idea that the king gives lands to the nobles give it to the knights give it to the peasants, and in return they give service to the next level up. So the peasants give service to the knights give it to the nobles, and the nobles give it to the kings. Then we start moving in the early modern period to the idea of capitalism. There is some people classify it as mercantilism in the middle. These peasants start being paid or renting land from their lords, and the lords owe fealty, but it's more of a soft concept to the king. There are less hierarchical structures, and it's much more reaction with money and spending things. So, moving from a feudal society, very organized, to a capitalist society, still very hierarchical, but with money as the trades. For those people who can't see, I'm just giving you a list of these things. Later medieval period, traditionally we always think of medieval period as illiterate. Actually, by the later medieval period, by the time we're getting to 1300, literacy rates have dramatically increased, and you start getting literacy in the lower orders. Not only do priests teach some people how to read, but also you start getting some communication. Some of your merchants and things start training people on literacy. But by the early modern period, we have the printing press, and suddenly literacy shoots through the roof. Everyone can start reading at least a little bit, at least some terms, at least some ideas, and everyone will know someone who can read properly. In the later medieval period, there is almost a religious stability. Everyone is predominantly Catholic. You do start getting the idea of the Lollards and the Lutherans, the idea that the church shouldn't be so corrupt, that it shouldn't be in getting so much money out of things, and the idea that maybe you should start teaching your religion in your native language, but it still all revolves around the church as a whole. However, by the early modern period, these small seeds have begun to germinate, and we start to get lots of competing religious ideas, and all of these religious ideas start bringing with them political ideas as well. We get very interesting ones from the levelers, who think that everyone deserves the vote, which is, absolutely terrible and will get murdered off in the end. We have the fifth monarchists, who want like a puritanical regime on England and turn it into a new heaven on earth by following Christ's ideas and bring Christ back as king. And we've got the diggers, who are really, really controversial, because they believe everyone should be equal and that there doesn't really need to be any lords bossing them around, which that really gets them killed off. So yes, we've got these Protestants, these Puritans, we've still got the old Catholics, and we've got what becomes the Church of England. Henry VIII, of course, splits off from the church. He really keeps it basically a Catholic church, but in England. Very little changes go on under him. His son, Edward, and his daughter, Elizabeth, however, change things dramatically. And they provide a good balance with the monarch in the middle, the Puritans on one side, the Catholics on the other side, and allow those two weights to push against each other. And we have a change in society. Traditionally, in medieval period, we have three estates. The first estate, the priests, those who pray. The second estate, the nobles, those who fight and those who lord over things. And the third estate, the peasants, those who work. However, we start having the emergence of a different estate, the merchants, those who trade. And these aren't just merchants who buy things from one area and bring them to another and sell them. We also start getting the idea of urban artisans, your goldsmiths, your iron workers, people who are professional and do a complex job that doesn't relate to necessarily survival, but does relate to society as a whole. And they are being propped up by the peasants, but providing something. And this starts changing the balance. We start getting in the later medieval through to the early modern more riotous action, more people getting angry with things, because we start getting these people who have some of the privileges of the nobility, but they also have their grounding in the peasants, and they also are less foreign from the peasants. So we start getting some bits where each estate helped the other estate out, and this we can see is linked strongly to our festivals. So I'm going to be using examples from France, Italy, Flanders, and England. This might seem like an odd, disparate selection, but these are actually they have an awful lot to do with each other. The trade routes mean that lots of culture gets moved, and you can see here the trade routes going through the sea, and they also have connections by banking activities. These are the first later medieval and early modern areas. They developed before everyone. Italy is first. It's got all its trade from the Mediterranean. It develops very quickly. But by the end of it, Flanders and England are catching up and have actually caught up, and they probably end the early modern period and go into the industrial period earlier on. They have high population densities, more people in these urban environments, so more of that fourth estate that we're talking about. And they also have similar religious controversies. Of course, in Italy, ends up winning out as a Catholic country. Flanders has a good fight back between where it is between France and the Holy Roman Empire, and England becomes this sort of Protestant but not quite puritanical country. During the medieval period, all you did was work, with the exception of Sunday, which had a long sermon in the morning. Basically, the whole of the morning would be absorbed into the church. You would be sitting there listening to Latin that you probably didn't speak, looking at all the beautiful paintings on the walls. For those of you who were here earlier, we talked about St. John's and its one last medieval painting. So there was something to entertain you, but you were sitting in a church doing nothing, not really interacting with things. And then the rest of Sunday, you were either allowed to do archery or play football. Archery, the national sport, allowed everyone to train up as soldiers, and particularly for the medieval period, as we were campaigning in the 100 Years' War, this was a big thing. And football isn't like football we have now. Think of it more as rugby without the rules. Two streets would get involved, or two villages would get involved. They would get into a street, and the aim of the game was to get the ball from one end of the street to the other. That was basically the rule set. People got killed, people got injured, and this was considered a horrific, riotous, and horrible thing. And so people banned it on the idea that we were being pure and proper every so often. But really, what they were just doing is trying to encourage everyone to do archery so they could be trained for war and ready for combat, ready for the 100 Years' War. Because this is so intense, people do need days off, and during the medieval period, there's so many festivals, there's almost a festival each week. Depending on your location, there'll be different ones, there'll be different saints that are honoured, there'll be different ones for the church, your local church. There's too many to even go through for an entire session, but we will be looking at the big three: Carnival and Lent, Corpus Christi, our midsummer sessions, and Christmas and our midwinter ones. So, I'm going to start the year with the start of the medieval and early modern year. During medieval period, the start of the year was in March, and we have Carnival from. I'm going to get the definition up here because I always get my pronunciations wrong, and I apologise to those people. It comes from the concept carne levare, which means goodbye meat. This is a really extreme and riotous event. There's lots of tie-ins to our early pagan festivals, and it is all sanctioned by the church. Things are allowed because the church says we can. However, these things built up. They allowed the peasants to vent off some of their anger, some of their oppression. They allowed people to enjoy themselves and forget some of the terrible things that were happening. Often people would go through the street masked. They would get up to all sorts of things. And indeed, we have people writing in early modern Italy complaining about women being masked, that they would start sleeping with other people, that people would start being adulterous, no one would know what was going on, and that women were banned wearing these masks and enjoying Carnival to the same extent because they knew what they would get up to. They knew that people would cheat on each other, and this was not a good thing. Indeed, Carnival got to extreme things at cases. Yes, people would drink a lot, people would enjoy themselves, people would eat a lot, people would maybe sleep with people when they shouldn't do. However, usually injuries were just of the drunken fun nature. However, as we're going into early modern period, we have some where things get out of control. Roman, a small town in France, which was actually quite a big industrious town at the time, had vying between our three bottom estates, our merchants, our peasants, our nobles. There were also divides between Protestants and Catholics. Indeed, our Protestant lower level nobles didn't have to pay taxes. Everyone else was having to pay taxes to support the crown, support the various things. There had been poor harvests, and people were getting angry. Carnival comes round and people put on masks. The idea is perhaps to scare the nobles, remind them who are the bigger number. The peasants actually, if they all get organized, actually have the power. There are more of them. They can do things. They start getting together. However, this gets everyone encourages each other, and it gets overblown. And the peasants come out and they actually murder several of the landowning elite, these lower level nobles. It doesn't help that these nobles are also Protestant and the peasants tend to be Catholic. So there's kind of like both an economic and a religious thing for their outcry. And while Roman is an extreme example and where several do, and they actually have to crack down afterwards, there are occasions where odd people, because people are wearing masks, because people are drinking, they can actually get away with crimes. So there are things, individual examples where smaller scale individual people, particularly miserly people, tend to get beaten up or killed during these things. So we are not thinking our tame thing. Do not think modern ideas where, yeah, people get a bit drunk and have a bit of fun. These are at best our football hooligans on a night out. They're at best going to smash things, going to get drunk, going to have lewd behaviour. At worst, we're having murders and people die. And here we have from a more northern thing. So we've had southern France and we've had our pictures from Italy as well. This is Peter Bruegel the Elder, The Fight Between Carnival and Lent. These are two polar opposites. Carnival is all about letting loose because you are going to have your period of Lent, your period of keeping things tame and together. I'm going to zoom in onto various areas just to show you this. This is normally where I'd wave my laser pointer to show you where I'm looking at, but we will zoom in. So on the left-hand side, you can see Carnival in full things. We have our guy with a mask carrying his staff. We have people playing music, people with their face painted on the left-hand side. And up on that top right-hand side, a man riding a beer barrel on skis through the streets with a pie on his head and meat skewered on a stick. My idea of fun. This sounds like a wonderful festival to me. But then on the other side, we have the much more pious Lent. You can see people are looking somber. We have in the top right-hand side with the Tudor hat on, a man giving out alms to the poor. We can see people on the bottom right-hand side giving out more support to the poor. And everything is a much more sober, calmer idea, particularly compared to, I couldn't cut him out of this photo completely, our man with his riding the beer barrel. So during the Lent Carnival, eat everything you want, drink everything you want, get it all out of your system. Lent, however, was a much more austere time. People had to fast. They had to exclude meat, eggs, and cheese from your diet. There was also, people would then start to eat fish as their main protein source instead. There was changes in the law at various times. Every time there's a bad fish harvest, they would allow dairy, so they'd allow cheese and milk in your diet to balance things out. And we have a great quote from one of our poets of the early modern period saying that Lent's main enemies were a dog, a butcher, and a Puritan. The Puritans didn't like Lent, not because they actually liked the idea of restricting and being more pious, but Lent was controlled by the church. Like Carnival, our big vent of things, our big calm down was very church organized, and it was very much about getting the community together. Charles I, who you very rarely hear positive things say about, as I said previously, Henry VIII had stayed pretty much Catholic, but Edward and Elizabeth had this balancing act between the Puritans and the Catholics. Charles, who would start off the English Civil War and cause all this chaos during it, he actually had quite a nifty political idea. He wanted to support the Catholics, but also toe a line to the Protestants, particularly the Puritans. What he decided was, he said, we are going to allow, we're going to ban dairy so that people have to eat fish during Lent. But this isn't a religious thing. This is not because I'm Catholic and supporting the Catholics. This is because we are at war with the continent. This is because if we are having people fish, we're having more people better trained on ships, we're improving our navy, people will then be able to be recruited into the navy. So I'm going to ban dairy and allow people to just eat fish during this period, because that will mean that we will all be stronger as a nation. And so he bought off some of the more hawkish Puritans who were very against Catholic France at the time to allow Lent and give his Catholic supporters. During all this time, this is actually restricted by law. Local councils have the ability to make people pay if they start eating meat, make people pay fines, make people have small stints in jail or the stocks if they go against this idea. This all gets, both Carnival and Lent all gets banned when we have the English Civil War. The Protestants win, the Roundheads win with the Puritans in power. This all gets banned. When Charles II comes back at the end of it all, he does actually repeal this and does actually allow fines to come back for all these things. However, no one actually gets fined. So again, he keeps this pendulum balanced by saying, no, you are, strictly speaking, you are not allowed to do these things, but no one's going to actually chastise you for it. So we've had kind of like our move from our Carnival and our big thing. We're going to go on to our mid-summer, but at the same time, it's important to tell you what's happening in the urban environment. So as we've been moving on, we've been getting more of these merchants, these artisans. People start getting together into guilds. Now the guilds are still in Chester. You can still you still hear things about the guilds in Chester. This is when they start off in this medieval period and the later medieval period as people are getting together. And then they're in full swing by the early modern period. They are an odd mixture. They are a gathering of our third and our fourth estate. So technically they are lower levels of people. But some of these people within their cities get to be quite high. They get to be mayors, they get to be sheriffs, they get to be important people with important rights and important powers. And indeed, they can actually fight off lords for powers for their city. They're sort of a cross between a standard, so think of it as your fair trade or your red tractor, a union, something that actually fights for your block, and something that also keeps out others and people who are innovating. So they're an odd mix of kind of like hierarchical, but also for the common people. Sorry, I'm just losing my voice. Give me 2 seconds. But these develop during the late medieval period, and they become fully established during the early modern period. And as we are secularizing, it might be a bit of an extreme, but as the Catholic powers pull back, the guilds start taking on a lot of these festivals, start funding them, and start building them up to show that they are part of the institution. Like the church, they should be considered important. Like the church, they should be considered out of the thing of all these horrible lords fighting over things. We have mystery, morality, and miracle plays in various parts of the country. I know we're only used to them in a few parts now, in Chester and York and the like, but these were about throughout the country. They weren't on every year, but initially they were organised by the Catholic Church, really to tell the story of the Bible. Initially, they were in Latin still. Then they moved over as they realised that, they might actually need to communicate these ideas in a language other than Latin. Initially, they were very symbolic. People had to pay them respect, but they became more personal and more a bit almost satirical. They were devoted to saints and saint days, and they then started to change and develop to the local areas. And here we have a list, I apologise for all the small writing, of all the ones that the guilds had taken over. There were 40... Sorry. 27 listed here, and then there's 42 in total of these ones. They are all things from the Bible. They're all taken over, and there'd be commentary. So people would parody people in power. So maybe the fall of Lucifer might look like somebody that we know. You know, you might use it to comment on the fact that you dislike other people's higher ups and things. And so they start becoming a bit of and against the upper echelons, or at least against the other echelons. Sometimes the tanners might be attacking the drapers, say, or the like. One question, just because I know we've got a disparate thing I've had. So while I can do nearly all of these things, I've been asked who the Forbers are, and despite lots of research, I've not been able to work out who the Forber is. So they're working with the Smiths and the Pewterers. So if anyone has any genius ideas on who they are, please get to me at the end so I can know who a Forber is, because I'm struggling to find out who they are, and somebody asked me, and I just can't cope. So yes, so these are all building up there, getting themselves into society, showing where they are, and as they are, the church is pulling away. So our Midsummer Corpus Christi mystery plays are becoming a more secular event rather than a religious one, but they are still providing, or they are now providing, more commentary and attacks against the lords and against the other higher-ups. So mystery plays only went every few years. It wasn't regular. There wasn't a strict timetable on it. It wasn't every 4 years. It was a bit random. On the other years, we would have midsummer and midwinter watches. Both of these have serious pagan origins connected to the solstices. They're again in Roman period, but the church absorbs these again. The midsummer was much more explosive and decadent. The midwinter was more tame. Both often had priests with candles coming with them. They would light candles and say prayers. Indeed, your first midsummer watches, if you had to take off your hat and kneel as the priests came by, and then often there would then be the procession afterwards. We've got these going all the way back to, we've got records of them from the 1325, and we have a beautiful record of one of our first ones with all the details, actually, things saying, in 1564 we had 4 giants, 1 unicorn, 1 dromedary, 1 luce, 1 camel, 1 dragon, 6 hobby horses, and 16 naked boys. I think it's quite interesting that we've got 1 camel and the dromedary separate. So even though, they're early modern, they don't really know other things. They obviously know different cultures enough to know the difference between a camel and a dromedary. And of course, the naked boys are, a big thing of it. There's also, we have lots of accounts of devils with feathers. That's one of the big ones, which is actually an old pagan Roman one that remains during this period. However, like our mystery plays, which is slowly secularizing, these start becoming the target of Puritans and Protestants. Indeed, in 1575, a Protestant mayor comes in and actually bans these as horrible, degraded things. Horrible, degraded festivals that don't really have a tie to Christianity. At least Carnival and Lent, while they're terrible and pagan in their ideas, they're still linked to Christianity, whereas Midsummer and Midwinter are just there as old pagan events. However, they get brought back just 3 years later. A new mayor comes in, they get brought back, although both the devils with the feathers and the naked boys get banned as they're way too pagan. They're definitely a symbol of Catholic and pagan ancient history type thing, and they want to bring it up to date. This has vies back and forward depending on who we get in the mayor, presumably who's being taken the mick out of, who's being teased, and who doesn't like it. Winter, as I said, was a bit more solemn. There were more candles, there were more ceremonies with it, and they got into would start bleeding into the Christmas ideas. So, as we are coming up to Christmas, I know it might not feel like it as we're all locked down, but we have to remember, we've got all the lights and all the lovely things. And in all fairness, during the early modern period and the later medieval period, there were an awful lot of plagues. So there were an awful lot of times where people had to be locked down and not enjoy the Christmas celebrations as much as wanted to. This has been a tradition for a long, long time. We have stones aligned to midwinter and midsummer from at least 2000 BC, possibly older. So people were aligning things, were thinking that this time was an important time for over 4,000 years. By the Christian period, by the Roman period, we have Saturnalia coming up, which is a 7-day event where you can celebrate like Carnival. It was decadent, all sorts of extremes were had, and the rules during Saturnalia was as long as you do not break any legal laws, you cannot be held responsible for what you did. So you slept with somebody you shouldn't have. You made a fool of yourself in front of your family. That could not be brought up because that was during Saturnalia, and that was a time of excess and enjoying yourself. So you can see it's already starting to be it's got a precedent for being quite an extreme festival. Indeed, by the Christian period, we'd actually lengthened it. 7 days was not enough, so there was now 12 days of feasting. It became a massive, big celebration. To begin with, you had pre-Christmas fasting. This would start from Advent Sunday, and you would limit your diet. It might not be the same as we would think of as fasting. So the rich were reduced to having soups, stews, and fish instead of roast or pies. So you're still having quite a lot, and your soups and stews might quite often have meat or meat stock in them. So we're not, you're not restricting your diet too much, just, no big roasts. The poor tended not to join in with this fasting. Indeed, we have accounts from the 15th century of people complaining that they have no puddings nor sauce, but stinking fish not worth a louse during this time period. Fish was often considered a poor man's food because it's something you could get with very little work. Indeed, oysters, now considered quite a luxury, was considered very poor food. So that you often find those in little medieval fire pits or early modern fire pits, lots of oyster shells where people use those to eat their food and then could use them as plates afterwards and the like. So you had your fasting to begin with. This would all build up, and then on Christmas Eve, you had a stronger fast. This was actually where you actually had to have a serious fast, where very little was allowed. Meat, cheese, and eggs were all forbidden, and you were considered that you should eat less and be very restrained. However, you then had 12 days of gorging yourself. You would have Christmas Day, New Year's Day, and Epiphany would be particularly big feast days, but all of the 12 days would be feasting. It would be quite common in the later medieval period, it was de rigueur that your lord had to invite his peasants to feast with him. This tailed off a little bit by the early modern period, but was still in place. The Lord was forbidden from making his peasants work. So for those people who still had those old feudal ties, you were not allowed to make your peasants work during the 12 days of Christmas. However, there was a consideration that that the Lord would get gifts from his peasants. So the Lord would not allow you to work and would also host you for food, but the peasants had to provide gifts, which tended to be in the form of foodstuffs. So really, the peasants would provide the food for this feasting, or at least a significant amount of food for the feasting. As we go on into the period, some people fall out of it, and the urban areas start changing their structures because they don't have the same lord to peasant structure that everyone else does. But it's still, even by the 16th century, it's still very much there. Indeed, we have one of our poets from the period who says, "At Christmas we banquet the rich with the poor, who then but the miser does open his door." So even by the 16th century, it's considered very bad form not to bring things, not to open up your door, feast your lower classes. Right from the Roman period, there is an idea that gift giving is a thing with Christmas. So right from Saturn, when we start Saturnalia. This is a very Roman tradition. It's in other Roman festivals, but it becomes a very Christmas thing. For the peasants to the Lord, this is more of a case of a duty of sorts. But from lords to lords, they actually give what we would have thought of as proper Christmas presents, individual items that are actually something with thought in them. And as time goes on, this slowly bleeds through the lower classes. Indeed, we have Samuel Pepys discussing in his diary about what he gave to his various friends, and on New Year's Day he gave a gift to his wife of a valuable walnut cabinet. So, and while he was well off, he was not extremely well off. He was this middling sort. He was this merchant class. So this is definitely bled down from the high ups to our middle class by this stage. So we have our 12 days of feasting, big ones being Christmas Day, New Year's Day, and Epiphany. There would often be competitions between lords on who would be able to give the most to their peasants, who would be able to have the most decadent festivals. Richard II, the king, during the peasants' revolt and during harsh times, and might explain why he's later on doing so well, is had one event with 10,000 guests, 200 oxen, and 200 tubs of wine. So a very big feast, which might show again when we had our Carnival and our church letting things explode and die down, letting all the peasants get all their energy out and then plateau off. Christmas again, another period where everyone gets riled up. Richard, who has already had one major rebellion that nearly takes him out and the aristocracy with him, suddenly starts making sure everyone's invited. Everyone, particularly near his royal palace, are all happy and loving him. So there's definitely an element of control here. And finally, on the 5th and the 6th, so on Epiphany, we have wassailing. Wassailing is a really interesting one. There are two different sorts of wassailing. One which is a more rural idea, and you go out and you have a drink and you have a big celebration, and you also give drink to the land, which is the idea to get your harvests better. Very, very pagan, very, very rural ideas. And then the urban one, which sort of develops from our lords giving sanctuary, giving feed to the people. Our urban one, you start knocking on people's doors, and at different times there are different things. There are different ways of interpreting them. Early on, you knock on the door and you start threatening the people. Later on, this actually develops that you start bringing alcohol with you, and the people inside give you food. So it kind of replicates our Lord to our peasant ideals. But these are violent and feisty people who are all getting drunk. The idea was that you passed around your cup. You had a wassail vessel. You passed it around. I'm just trying to get the definitions up, and I've lost my definitions. Sorry, I apologise. You passed it up to say wassail. You drank and passed it to the next person. Wassail meant good health, and the next person would say drink ale, and then they would drink from it, and they would pass it on saying wassail. So you were raucous and rowdy. These wassailing events were definitely an urban abnormality, but they started getting taken in by the lords, particularly the idea that they would bring in drink, and the lords would use them as another way of bragging. They would either try and show off how much they were giving to the wassails, or they would show off how good quality the people wassailing were coming. We had people having various drinking people coming in who were singers, who were musicians, and would come and play for them as well as share drink. And we have lords who would get the most beautiful young women from their villages to come in and to provide drink for everyone, and would compete on the number and the loveliness of the young ladies that we're bringing. So this was sort of bringing it almost back to our later medieval feudal ties, and they would try and make a big thing of it. And so Chester, as we said, enjoyed all these different festivals. It was a port, so it was actually quite well connected with all these other continental ones. One of the two big ones were the wool and grain trade. Things would come out. These goods would come out of the ports, be sent to the various ones, and your merchants, your sailors would all bring back cultural ideas with them. Chester, during the English Civil War, was a royalist city. To be honest, it was really neutral. It tried very hard to be a neutral city. The parliamentarians initially came in, they were chucked out, and then the royalists came in, and Chester just didn't have enough might to throw them all out. It kept up some of these festivals, some of these events, but much more muted. During the English Civil War, the first 2 years, Chester was doing all right, but as 1644 encroaches, Brereton comes from the east and slowly brings a siege upon Chester. And indeed, its last Christmas, between 1656 and 1645 and 1646, it is under tight siege. And the only account really of Christmas we have there is one of our journalists writing that as a Christmas present, the parliamentarians, rather than firing stones over with their mortars, fired shells and granados, which are more expensive, more dangerous weapons that can cause fire. So a nice bit of stiff a British stiff upper lip there, people being shot at, and they're going, well, for Christmas presents, they gave us the better form of being shot at, which was actually the worst form of being shot at. Chester surrendered in 1646. Christmas wasn't banned until 1647. Chester did get one Christmas, 1646, outside of siege. However, unfortunately, it was hit by plague. So, like us, they were locked down, they were not enjoying themselves, and grass was growing in the streets. And here we have a ballad. So, during the early modern period, everyone would go to the pub to get their news. This is sort of like our early modern Daily Star or the Worst of the Sun and the Daily Mail. They're gossipy, they are talking about various people's love lives, bemoaning better days and the like. The idea would be that somebody in your pub would be literate and have a good voice, and they would read or sing these ballads to everyone else. So this is The World is Turned Upside Down. It's supposed to be done to the tune of When the King Enjoys His Own Again. I'm going to read it out to you, but I'm afraid I'm not going to sing it. I think it's probably better for us all. Listen to me, and you shall hear. News has not been this 1,000 year. Since Herod Caesar and many more, you've never heard the like before. Holy days are despised, new fashions are devised. Old Christmas is kicked out of town. Yet let's be content, and the times lament. You see the world turns upside down. The wise men did rejoice to see our Saviour Christ's nativity. The angels did good tidings bring. The shepherds did rejoice and sing. Let's all honest men take their example by them. Why should we from good laws be bound? Yet let's be content, and the times lament. You see the world turned upside down. Command is given, we must obey, and quite forget old Christmas Day. Kill 1,000 men, or a town regain. We will give thanks and praise amain. The wine pot shall clink, we shall feast and drink, and then strange motions will abound. Yet let's be content, and the times lament. You see the world turned upside down. Our lords and knights and gentry too do mean old-fashioned to forgo. They set a porter at the gate that none must enter in to rate. They count it a sin when poor people come in. Hospitality itself is a drowned. Yet let's be content, and the times lament. You see the world turned upside down. The serving men do sit and whine and think it long ere dinner time. The butler's still out the way, or else my lady keeps the key. The poor old cook in the larder doth look, where is no goodness to be found. Yet let's be content, and the times lament. You see the world turns upside down. To conclude, I'll tell you news that's right. Christmas was killed at Nasby's fight. Charity was slain at the same time. Jack Tell Truth, a friend of mine, likewise then did die. Roast beef and shred pie. Pig, goose, and capon no quarter found. Yet let's be content, and the times lament. You see the world is quite turned upside down. So, very cutting commentary on our parliament. This is done in 1646, so just after the parliamentarians have basically won the first civil war, and people are writing these things about their new lords. They are bemoaning the old times, bemoaning hospitality, and why all these things are locked down. So, why are the parliamentarians wanting rid of all these festivals? Mainly, it is the Puritans, so the what we might call moderate Protestants, the ones who are wanting more political ambitions. They're not really too bothered. They're a little bit perturbed by them, but they're not too bothered. The big reasons were just that they used to justify was that the festivals themselves aren't in the Bible. Some of the events are and linked to, but the actual way that they're all celebrated was not in the Bible. That they caused serious injury, that people got injured, hurt, and that they also injured themselves. They were linked to a corrupt church, they got drunk, they did sin. This either injured your body or your soul. However, the cynic in me says that these are the ones that they say. They're really worried that it is linked to the old feudal societies, your lords tied to your peasants, that is linked to the Catholic Church, an outside power, that it influences the masses. It allows them to rebel. It allows them to use biting commentary. Our guilds get to say things about their masters. Our festivals, people get to say things about all the various politicians. And the celebrations can be used to show support for the monarch. So the parliamentarians want rid of it because they want control. They don't actually ban Christmas itself. Christmas itself is kept as a holy day, but the idea is rather than Christmas Eve and the time beforehand you fast, Christmas Day should be a holy day where you fast and just go about your normal day, but keep it holy, keep it proper. You should do what you were doing in Christmas Eve, considering the Lord. Indeed, markets and the like still went on. Markets and the like were actually encouraged by Parliament, and they wanted to keep it that it was just normal functioning, but that there was thought behind it. However, Cromwell did not last forever. He him, and this was not a popular move. Charles II comes in, and well, he doesn't. The country is more Protestant than it is Catholic at this stage. He doesn't want to appear that he is a Catholic invader coming from France. So he pardons everyone but those who signed his father's death warrant. And he allows more religious tolerance than either his father or Cromwell had allowed. He brings back the Christmas traditions and some of the Carnival traditions, but watered down. No longer do local councils have, well, they have the power to fine people, but no longer do they fine people. No longer is there competitions on how much generosity do people give, but there is still merriment, enjoyment, and a little bit of chaos. So Christmas is perhaps curtailed, but thankfully not civilized. I'm going to be here to answer questions to people who are live, but for people who are seeing the recorded version, if you'd like to know anything more about the early modern period, or if you've got any burning questions, or you can tell me what a forebear is, please send me an email at s.chadwick@chester.ac.uk. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Okay, thank you, Sam. Can you stop your screen sharing now? And we already have one question for you, but can I ask anybody else with questions? Can you please type them in now? We have a comment from Kay Ely that says, excellent talk and great illustrations. I have to agree with that because I've been reading about the history of Venice, and your map of the trade routes made me go, yes, now I understand it a bit better. Yeah.
There's so much linked to Flanders and Venice. This is the one that you always seem to think that Venice is just going to be connected to Italy, but it really is that there's so much communication and ideas going between the two.
Yeah. And the other echo in your talk was I was also reading about Venetian sumptuary laws, and they were saying, well, they had all these laws, but nobody was ever fined under any of them. And it sounds like there's echoes of that in your festival stuff.
I think a lot of them are there because somebody took the mick at some stage. Somebody pushed things and got a bit, uppity. And they went, you know what, we'll put a law in, but we won't really do it except for Bob, because Bob really deserved it,
Yeah. We have a question from Anne Murray about your reference to the football and the archery, and she says, well, what did the women do on Sunday afternoons?
Ooh. Now, I think the archery they joined in with, and I know some of the football, they're kind of like joining in from the sidelines. They're not getting involved as strictly, but I'm afraid I'm not really good on medieval. Yeah, my
it's men's history, isn't it?
it definitely is. There's some great ones from the civil. I mean, in the Civil War, women really do get involved, particularly in Chester. They actually get involved in both the gathering of supplies and the siege of Chester when one of the wall comes down at what is now the Roman Gardens. There's a big V shape that you can see where the women actually.
Oops, your microphone's cut out.
Oh, sorry.
The women actually.
Hello, have you got me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
So the women actually plugged the gap with mattresses. So whilst the men are fighting on the top, they're actually busy basically re-securing the hole and getting it booby-trapped ready. So they put mattresses to absorb the cannonball blows and then moving like spikes and things to stop. So they're actually getting involved. The Civil War is quite a good one. There's numerous ones. We get at Latham House, we get a fantastic woman who sits in the top of a tower as cannonballs are coming through the room and just going, no, my men are on the front line, so I'm going to join in the fight too. And I will join in the fight by commanding them all from the top. And they only managed to convince when two cannonballs come through the room in one day, they managed to convince her to get down at least into the safe areas. So.
Okay, Ian Cross wants to know, was the hostility to Christmas just a Presbyterian thing, or was it shared by more radical groups, e.g. the Levellers?
So it was a puritanical thing, definitely. The Levellers had sympathy for it, but not. I think they would have been happy if it didn't have all the links with the Lords and the Church. I think they would have been happy with some of the celebration, but not the feudal links to it. I think they were more about the society than the religion.
Okay. Chris Robinson says, what are corvisars?
Corvisars? Oh, was that one of our guilds, was it?
I'm not sure. Would you like to add a bit to that, Chris? One of the things I did notice about the list of guilds was how many of them are still very common surnames. Yeah. And Chris Robinson says, yes, it was one of the guilds. Ooh. What is a corvisar? Another one you're going to have to go.
Yeah. I'll come back to you on that one. I did do a list of them all at one stage because I was doing another project. I'm afraid I have not got that down as a nice, easy note, but I will come back on that one.
Okay. And did Oliver Cromwell enjoy a drink and a smoke?
Ooh. I would imagine on the smoking he would have done. That was considered a good habit at that stage. I would imagine that wouldn't have been it was considered that it was good for your mind and the like. I'm afraid I'm not really a Cromwellian. I like the general.
Oops.
Have I gone again?
Yeah, microphone went again. It's all right. Yes, you're a general people.
I like the general people rather than the big names, I'm afraid. So, but I'm not sure on that.
Okay. And Rob also says, many thanks for the talk. More, please. And do you do a guided tour of historic Chester, please? Well, maybe we can arrange that post-lockdown.
I'm more than happy to do that. I've done for my students, but I've never. I've done for students and family members, but I've never done for anyone else. But more than happy to. Yes.
Okay. I think that would be a great idea, especially one of all those tiny little bits of Chester that means something to you.
I was just about to say you've got to do with Chester. There's so much history. You've got to narrow it down some way because otherwise you'd be there for a whole day.
and one thing that I personally wanted to say, was Rob Dawson says, great, put me down for a tour. Dan Murray says, very interesting talk, thanks. I'm a member of Hastings Borough Bonfire Society, and that's a pretty ancient tradition that ties in with all this. And it's a great letting off of steam. Lewis Bonfire in particular has been described as a pub crawl with flaming torches, and that's a reasonably accurate description. So remind me to invite you to one.
Oh, definitely. That sounds wonderful.
Because I'm actually a member, I can get behind the scenes on these things. So that would be interesting. Well, I think that's all the questions. There are lots of comments, and we've given you a couple of bits of homework. What is a Corvi style? What is a forber? That's not normally what happens. Thank you very, very much, Sam. I'm going to end the broadcast now. Thank you to all the people that have watched and listened. And this talk will be going on our YouTube channel. It will be available for about a month. And happy Christmas, everybody.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Happy Christmas. All right. Thanks, Sam. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.